Welcome to the Undragoned Podcast, focusing on fortifying the people of God and slaying dragons.
All right, episode 8 of Undragoned. I have my pastor, Ritch Sandford, in for round 2 in the studio. So thanks for coming on, Ritch.
Yeah, man. Love being here.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking about a sermon series that you recently did called The Path to Victory. And so give us a quick overview of that sermon series.
Oh, man. Yeah, so I guess it was developed a bit from the way that I read both the Old and the New Testament. We continually see this victory language being used of our present age now, that Jesus, he has established his church, and he will build his church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. He will be with us to the very end of the age. The Great Commission, as he sends people out, it's not like listen, you're all going to fail, everyone's going to die, but just do it anyway. The language of Old Testament and New continually point to the success of the kingdom being advanced. It's going to start small, it's going to grow huge, like the Matthew 13 kingdom building parables. And so the Bible is just rich with this we win language for Christians. And I've been noticing that for the brothers and sisters in our congregation, many are watching the times, seeing what's going on, and feeling just defeated, feeling really defeated. And when we see things in a microcosm, we look at our American Western culture, and it's crumbling. Our liberties are being stripped day by day, and it's not the dystopian futures that we looked at in the movies feel like, oh my goodness, some of those themes could be real for us. We talked about those kind of things before, and wow, it could actually be here. I began to realize without a right theology of the victory of Christ's kingdom advancing in this age, we're just going to walk around with our heads hung low and defeated. And until we get busy doing the things that victorious marching Christians are commanded to do, I was concerned that many believers might just not come out of the funk that 2020 put them in. So that's what kind of led to that series.
For sure. And I mean, just the title alone is pretty provocative. And to your point, where we are right now, especially in our Western culture, we're experiencing a lot of new trials, new levels of maybe affliction, persecution. Our culture celebrates death in the name of autonomy, abortion. The sexual revolution that started in the 20th century seems to be at its peak, with all of the many things that are happening there. And we've even had pastors be in trouble for preaching the gospel. So, like we just had the instance with James Coates up in Canada.
Pastor,
Like, was that the first instance in our Western world of a pastor being jailed?
I think for COVID it is.
Okay.
I don't know of another one that's actually gone through for COVID. It's happened before in Canada, but I think that COVID, this is the first one.
Gotcha. Yeah, but I mean, he was put in jail. He just got out. But
and it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, right? So it went longer than that. And I think that's part of what kind of startled people. This wasn't just a guy brought down and then given a fine and then sent home and told, we're going to close your church's doors. He literally is put in jail alongside high-level criminals in an orange jumpsuit, not allowed to see his family, and only allowed to get out 30 minutes a day, like crazy stuff like that. So I think that was really startling to people to see the reality of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just, yes, as you said, seeing him in an orange jumpsuit was just like, wow. Okay, this is happening to a pastor who just refused
for one reason. Yep.
Who refused to require masks.
Would not comply.
And not comply, yeah. And so, I mean, we see these things, and they're kind of building. There's a crescendo effect, it seems like, where things are getting worse and worse and worse. And some Christians are probably thinking, like, man, this world is going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And in the face of that, you have this provocative sermon series titled The Path to Victory. Like, you're not fazed by what's happening right now in our world, which is just, I find that so fascinating that I want to expand and talk to you about why you think that in the first place. And so maybe the first place for us to start then would be, before we go ahead, I want to tell you guys that this sermon series is on the Mission Church's website. That's themissionutah.com. It's also on our app that you can download on the App Store, The Path to Victory. So, first question then, Rich. So, how did we get to the place that we are in? So, we're in a very precarious situation as Christians in this world. And I recall during one of your sermons you saying that we wouldn't be in this situation had it not been for the failure of previous generations.
Mm.
So, if you could expand on that, like, what did you mean, and in what ways did those previous generations fail?
Great. So first, to set that up, what I mean by that is that if you were to look back 3, 4, 5 generations, Christians were the dominant force in every institution of our country. The way that they made decisions in every department of our government levels, arts and entertainment, media, in schooling, in every institution was dominated by Christians. In fact, the voices that we recall back to and we point back to go, oh yeah, that guy was an atheist. That's because he was odd. He was the one who stood out. He was so unique because the Christian influence was so rich in our country. So how did we go from that to where we are today? And yes, I have said things to the effect that previous generations' failures have led us to where we are today. And my disclaimer on this is not to be an ingrate. We have to acknowledge there's lots of good that have come from previous generations. You and I are still believers. Are believers today. We have the gospel. We're able to still be part of a country where we can preach truth from our pulpits. There's lots of good, but it's not doing anyone any favors to not look back at a previous generation and say we ought not be like what they were in the places they were unfaithful. And we have biblical precedent for this. So when Joshua was given the reins and he was told to take the people into the promised land, everyone prior to him had to stay out. And that generation was continually warned, do not be like your fathers in the wilderness. Don't be like them. They acted faithless. They were too afraid of the giants in the land that they wouldn't obey God. They trusted the lie that the giants could win more than the truth that God could win. And so their fear and cowardice kept them out of the promised land. And God continually, through the prophets, warns the people, don't be like those who came before you, who didn't operate rightly in that. So Joshua's generation could say, thank you, Ma and Pa, for preserving the word, passing it along here, giving me life and caring for me so we could move in. And maybe even having repented from some of the bad decisions that were made and setting us up to win. But at the end of the day, we ought not continue to do the things that faithless generations in the past, or not do the faithless things of previous generations, even if we love them. So more a finer point on it. What has happened in previous generations in American history? What happened in the last 50 years in our country? Well, I think that largely the Christians have vacated every institution, and I say every, I mean every institution. There is no institution in our country anymore that has as a dominant voice, even a dominant voice, Christianity. That in many of them, it's the whole tenor is the exact opposite of whatever Christianity would say. It's almost as though they would say, whatever Christians want, we're just going to go the exact opposite. That's what it looks like in most institutions. And we really don't have any sway as believers in any of those institutions. Those have been lost. I think that the reason they were lost is because believers over the course of time said, well, it's not our job to shape the world. It's not our job to try to, reorganize the deck chairs on the sinking Titanic. And I've heard that kind of phrase used. It's all going to hell in a handbasket. It's going to just go downhill, downhill, downhill. And then Jesus is finally going to return to rescue the few last remaining faithful ones here before it all blows up. That's not only theologically, I think, totally untrue, but it also leads us to exactly where we are right now, which is culture is far, far worse off now because Christians vacated those places and surrendered those institutions. And so that's major errors of our previous generation. That's at least one of the major errors. There's at least two more I can think of that are super huge errors that led to where we are. But calling it what it is, I think is helpful to start.
Yeah, for sure. So saying previous generations surrendered institutions to the world. So some examples then of those acts of surrender.
Oh man, school system. School system is a great example of one. There was a continued advanced attempt to try to rob prayer out of the schools, the 10 Commandments out of the schools, Bible reading in schools. And Christians somewhere along the line said, well, we shouldn't try to tell everyone that they should honor the 10 Commandments. Well, What in the world would make a Christian say that, brother? Like, what in the world would make a Christian say, you don't have to obey the commands of God? That's utterly absurd. But Christians got it in their minds that this is okay to just let the world go do whatever they think is right, but we need to do what we think is right. And we let there be that kind of divide in our policy making. So school systems then turn their back on God. Prayer disappeared. It's hard to find Christian teachers in schools any longer. And the agenda is so boldly anti-Christian that, children and students at all levels of schooling are mocked for even the most basic principles of kind of a theistic worldview that's held by most of the world over the ages is now mocked and belittled as the utmost of primitive thinking, And so that's one example right there. I think school systems we've just totally surrendered all of that to a false agenda.
For sure. Do you have one more example for us?
Oh, yeah. Politics. I mean, obviously, those things kind of relate a little bit because we talked about policy making with the Department of Education, which I think is a mess anyway. But the idea that Christians got to the point where they said, listen, we don't really care if the person's a Christian that we're going to put into office. As long as the person will further our plans, then, he or she will suffice. That was a totally terrible idea to try to say that a person doesn't have to be a Christian if they're going to try to further a Christian worldview in politics. And so Christians voted for non-believers or those who showed absolutely no fruit of Christian worldview, and then let them take over the halls of our Western parliaments, right? So the halls of Congress are now run by people who don't love the Lord. And it seems like every time you hear about a person who calls himself an evangelical as a congressman, they're saying that to get votes because they clearly aren't actually legislating that direction. So that's another place. Christians have started voting for people who weren't believers and it seemed like they cared about that. Arts. Well, let the world just do all the best movies, all the best music, all that kind of stuff just kind of was given off. All the money that went to those things went to whatever was teaching and propping up whatever was opposite to what God would say is good. And Christians just continued to comply with that all along the way.
And to piggyback off what you're saying here, I mean, I think it's also a matter of kind of what I'm hearing from you is that Christians have essentially privatized their faith to a degree.
Oh, absolutely.
Where it's
and then the world gave us that lie and we bought it. Someone said religion is private. No, it's not. It's personal, but it's not private. And the idea that we have to make that just the kind of thing that is supposed to stay within the four walls of your home, you cannot read the Bible, brother. From Genesis to Revelation, close it up and go, ooh, I'm supposed to be a quiet Christian and only prays in my house, separate from the world, never let my Christianity impact anything else I do outside. That's absurd. And the world has taught us that's where you're allowed to be Christian. And somewhere along the line, Christians have said, well, that's fair because I wouldn't want somebody to impose their worldview on me.
For sure. I mean, I'm just thinking about the Incarnation right now. Jesus becoming a baby and then, of course, living his life. But the Incarnation is essentially an invasion. And it's kind of like the signal of, okay, the kingdom of God is on this earth here in the form of the King Jesus. And Christianity is more than just, as you're saying, just this private belief that we hold within. We go to our churches, we take it home, and then that's it. It's announcing the kingdom. The king is actually here, and he's ruling and reigning, which I think we'd agree there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because we have that idea that, okay, it's just private, then we had no issue, previous generations had no issue surrendering those institutions, as you were saying. And
again, it was always a trade-off. So there wasn't like an entire generation of Christians who said, hey, let's not be Christian in the marketplace. I didn't go like that. It was a slow loss. And what happened is that I think that believers underestimated the wiles of our enemy. They underestimated just how strategic their advance was going to be and how motivated they were to bring their agenda to bear. I think that we underestimated. And that's one thing that all of us can look back at and say, wow, we want to be slow to not judge too much previous generations because, wow, they really, really had a concerted plan for decades of how this was going to go down. And it actually has done that. And so little bits at a time, incremental ways, Christians gave up on one little bit at a time, and it's gotten to where we are today. And one of the other things I was going to add to this is that all throughout this, the next generation of Christians has been progressively trained in God-hating institutions, the school systems of our country, to undermine all of the things that God has commanded as good and right and holy and honorable. So they have taught all of our kids, they've taught us to not only comply with what they do, but in many cases celebrate it, right? And so it's expected that Christian kids, if they're going to school, they're going to act and live and just like the kids in the world, and they're going to just approve of and at least not say anything negative about. At the very least, it's expected that the Christian kids coming through school systems today will not in any way impede this godless march, at the very least, and at the most, join them in that rebellion. And so generations of Christians have been sending their kids off to Caesar, and now surprised that they're Romans, and that's I don't know how to cut it. That is the way that I think that they infiltrated as quickly as they did.
One more thing with this. You, during the sermon series, you were using war language. And I want you to kind of talk about our purpose as Christians here, maybe kind of talk about like what our warfare actually looks like, because I know that was an important part of, you talked about Joshua and the Israelites, like they went to war to take the promised land that the Lord promised to them. But obviously, our job as Christians is not to, grab a sword and then just go run out into our local institutions and start swinging. So speak to the warfare aspect of our duties as Christians.
Yeah. So several times the Apostle Paul in the New Testament uses this wartime language, well, more than several, but several times specific to even the kind of armor that we're supposed to don and wear. And this isn't the kind of thing that only those most faithful frontline missionaries go and do. Think Ephesians 6. This isn't like, find those 2% of Christians who will go to the darkest regions of the jungles and preach the gospel. They need to wear the armor. No, all believers are to be prepared for battle and given an offensive weapon, the Word of God, the sword of the Spirit. And we're supposed to go into battle. And it's made super clear this is not physical battle for us against the world. So no, we don't advance the kingdom by shedding of blood, right? We proclaim the shed blood of the righteous one. That's how it is that we advance the kingdom. We're more likely to lay down our lives in the cause that we would die, rather than take the life of another. That's the way that it's going to operate for Christians, and it has throughout history. And we've grown dramatically since the days of 120 people in Jerusalem back then. So Jesus has been doing exactly what he says he was going to do. But when we quickly switch gears to say it's not physical battle, so Christians, put down your guns, put down your knives. When we switch gears, sometimes we let the intensity of that kind of language also turn off. So we go, well, it's not really war. It's more like just a big school, or it's more like just a big counseling session, or just a chat with your neighbor. No, it's war. It is war. It's not war with weapons of this world, but it's every bit as violent. It's going to cost us dearly to go do it. It's going to take sacrifice. There will be losses incurred along the way. There will be casualties in this war, and we're going to have to invest everything in order to win. And that's the thing that I think that sometimes falls out. I don't know of any Christians who are saying the way we're going to win is go pick up actual arms and go fight this. I don't know of any Christians that are saying that from a Christian perspective. You may be able to find some nuts out there somewhere. I don't know that that's a dominant voice in any measure. But many Christians are just the peace at all costs. And the assumption is that the way you get to peace is to not in any way engage in conflict, anything abrasive. If there's any friction, just get out. And that is exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to pick up from that wartime language. It's battle. It's going to be warfare. In fact, when you become a believer, you immediately get baptized into, using that metaphor in a different way here, you immediately get brought onto a battlefield in that that war wages inside of you. You versus your flesh, the new spirit-alive person in you, regenerate person, is now waging war against your flesh. Every day we're already fighting a battle, or we should be fighting a battle with our own sin, waging war on that. And that war is supposed to go outside of just our own selves as we try to subdue the earth. And again, it's done in spiritual means, but it is every bit as intense as real war.
Yeah, that's good. And I just wanted to make that, have you explain that just so no one's thinking, I just don't want any ambiguity there, right? especially in this climate. Like, don't want to get censored. Don't want this podcast to be taken off.
Right.
We are talking about how our worship is our warfare. So, all right. So we talked about how the institutions, they're not Christianized at all right now. And Christians are called to be in the world, to wage war for the glory of God in the way that we described. So maybe some more specific, let's get into some specific application then. So how can Christians then be on the path to victory, to fight in Christ's army today in our world? Speak to that.
We must recover faithfulness in every category of our lives. When you look back to the days of Joshua and the people who were entering into the promised land, it was said of them that they were faithful. They actually did follow through. They were not perfect. They had their errors and their struggles. But at the end of their lives, at the end of Joshua 24, again in Judges chapter 2, it'll make mention of that generation being a faithful generation who served the Lord all the days of their lives. And it wasn't until a following generation would turn, but they did. They all the way till their deaths, and until they died, and the elders who had led them died off after them. That's kind of how it talks about them. And it was faithlessness that was needed, faithfulness that was needed. And Joshua, as he gives his great charge to the people in chapter 23, as for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. He tells the people, be faithful, remain faithful. That's what it's all about. It's not about all these other things. Be faithful. As a church, we paused a long march through Hebrews to do that sermon series of Path to Victory. We'll be jumping back into Hebrews shortly here. And in Hebrews 11, the roll call of faith, we're seeing all these people have done these amazing deeds in this whole roll call of faith. But everyone that's called out and pointed to, it's not because they were so mighty or great. It constantly says, by faith, Abraham did. By faith, Moses did. By faith, Moses' parents did, and that generation did. And by faith, and it keeps going. So it's always attributed to the fact that they believed God was going to do what he said he was going to do. And so we can't just let it be assumed that, well, if we do just the right things. No, it has to be done in faith. So we have to believe that Jesus is actually going to score exactly the number of points that he has promised he's going to score. He's going to claim victory exactly as he's said that he was going to. He's going to build his church in the face of opposition, and no one can stop it. No one. And that's how we need to be thinking. And that with that kind of faith. If God is for us, who can be against us? The enemy's got nothing on us. Like, even when the enemy thinks he's winning, that's the wrath of God revealed against them. Like, God is marching forward here with us. So faithfulness. And if I were to give a little finer point on that, refusing to believe so much as one lie from the world. Like, just none. Not one lie. When the world says something, we should be over the top, through our legs, skeptical of it. Like, if the world tells you some new fact, that's just a worldly sentiment, our first thought should be no way. And then when you open the Word of God, we double check and make sure, oh, okay, wait, that's actually true. Or the areas we go, oh, no. This is wrong. A man is a man, a woman is a woman, right? In the beginning, he created them, male and female, he created them. Jesus said that, right? So we open the Bible and we go, nope, I'm out. Don't believe that. Well, wives should not submit to their husbands. Nope, don't believe that either. I don't believe one word of that. The Bible says, wives, submit to your husbands. Well, husbands shouldn't love their wives in an understanding way. Yes, they should. It says it right here. Children shouldn't obey their parents if they want to go get a transgender operation. Yes, they must. They must obey their parents. And we just should not comply with a single lie. And we should teach our kids to be absurdly stubborn in the face of the world. Like, just rigid to the point of maddening to the world, that we will not listen to one lie you say. You will not have any say in what we do in church. You will not have any say in what we teach our kids. We might do it exactly the opposite of what the world says, if that's what the Bible tells us. And I don't care what the world thinks about it. We need an entire generation of believers who thinks like that.
All right, book review time. And I want to look at one of my favorite reads of 2020, and that is Death by Living by N.D. Wilson. Now, Wilson, he's the son of Douglas Wilson, the pastor up in Idaho, and he's mainly a fiction writer. So he's written a few children's series. There's the 100 Cupboards series, the Ashdown Burials series, and there's one other one that I'm blanking on currently. He also has a few picture books, Hello Ninja and Hello Georgie, the sequel. My daughter, Lucy, she loves those books. Those are awesome, awesome nighttime reads right before bed. And he's also written some nonfiction, and Death by Living is his second work of nonfiction. His first one was Notes from the Tilt-A-Whirl, and how he described these two pieces, because he calls them companion pieces, was that Notes from the Tilt-A-Whirl was a book that kind of taught you how to see. So, and what he meant by that is like how we see our place here in the universe, how we see ourselves in place of God and man, how we are supposed to look out and see the world that we live in. So it was heavy focus on, like, he dealt with the problem of evil. He talked a lot about atheism and agnosticism in that book. In this book, Death by Living, it's all about how we should live. So if we have a proper understanding, proper sight of reality, then how should we then live? Kind of that Francis Schaeffer line there. And so his contention, his premise is that we start by laying our lives down. So that's where the title comes in. So death by living. Just like Christ said that we are called to lay down our lives, pick up our cross, and follow Christ. In that same way, we die to ourselves so that we can live to the glory of God. And so here's a line from the book that I really love on this point. I have around 250,000 conscious hours remaining to me in which I could be smiling or scowling, rejoicing in my life, in this race, in this story, or moaning and complaining about my troubles. I can be giving my fingers, my back, my mind, my words, my breaths to my wife and my children and my neighbors, or I can grasp after the vapor and the vanity for myself, dragging my feet, afraid to die and therefore afraid to live. And like Adam, I will still die in the end. And so it's really heavy on, that theme of how we actually find life when we lay ours down. And so this book is heavy on stories. Because, of course, we are creatures of story, of narrative. And Wilson makes this case quite effectively, I think, how our existence is shaped by the experiences of countless people back throughout history and moments in time that affected people where they made a certain decision. And you can kind of see where he's going with that. That has kind of that one decision has a ripple effect throughout the course of the historical timeline. So we're creatures of history, and he shares a lot of family history, a lot of family anecdotes in this story. He talks a lot about his grandpa. That's Jim Wilson. He was an evangelist as well. His passing, and talking about how he lived his life and how we can be moved and inspired to, in that same manner, lay down our lives and live for the glory of the King. And so there's so many good points, so many good nuggets that Wilson talks about in this book, how we can actually live rightly. It's not this cliche like life is a storybook. You can go pursue your dreams, kind of like the idea of the American dream. But no, it's like finding our place, whereas God called us. We lay down our lives, and then we go and do what the Lord has called us to do. And so really phenomenal read. He's a really, really good writer. And that is Death by Living by N.D. Wilson.